Hi.
Morning, Christine.
Yeah.
Christy.
Yes.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah.
Nice to meet
Hi.
you.
Nice to meet you as well. I think we're waiting on, so Victor emailed me and told me that he wouldn't be able to join.
Hmm.
Um, our clerk treasurer was Victor had asked to join Augie Fusco. Do you mind if I just go check in with him very quickly? I just want to make sure that he will be
Of
joining.
course.
Okay, I'll be
Feel
right
free.
back. Thank you.
Christy, he's not here.
He's not here?
He's doing it from home.
Okay. Is he
Yeah,
gonna, did he mention whether he was gonna sign in? Or you just know he's at home?
I just know he said he was taking the call from home.
Okay, perfect. Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
I'll let you know if I hear anything else.
Thanks. Okay, well, there's our answer. I don't actually have to go anywhere.
Okay. I see his little box has shown up on my screen.
I think that's Sally who.
That is me.
Yeah, she signed in as him right now. So let's see. We'll give him a minute or two.
Screen. And I assume you guys have had some conversations about the MEC and what direction the village might want to go in terms of an ongoing fundraising effort, the private piece of a private-public partnership,
Yeah, we've had
which
a
is
few.
why I'm here.
Yes, we've had a few conversations about it, but I do want to understand a little bit more what we're looking to do, just so that I can make sure that I've done my due diligence. So
Okay.
I'm hoping to have just sort of an introduction as to what specifically your Friends of MEC, correct? So there's the Marine Education Center, and then the Friends of MEC will be, in a sense, sort of like a fundraising aspect,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Much like our Mamaroneck Public Library has a separate 501c3 called the Friends of the Mamaroneck Public Library. Their sole mission is to seek financial support and develop community enthusiasm for the library. It's not an advisory committee. It's a way to find more financing for the MEC.
So I'm on the board of a Friends of Animals Lebanon organization, which is exactly the same thing. It's for
Right.
fundraising.
And
to
you know,
allow.
I think for me, the primary reason to try and go this route and get a 501c3 started is because of the difficulty the village has accepting credit card donations. And from my experience and from the people who have fundraised with me in the past, we have done an annual appeal by letter to a relatively small group of people in the village who are known to be philanthropic. And we've had fairly good results doing that annual appeal and getting people to send, pre-stamped, pre-addressed envelopes back to the village with a check in it.
Okay.
And I'm willing to continue to do that, but we can't do ongoing fundraising efforts throughout the year. We can't do crowdfunding. We can't make it easy for people to spontaneously feel inspired to give unless we can find a way that the village could accept credit card donations on an ongoing basis.
Okay.
And I don't know how much more you want before we get Augie on the line, but
Yeah.
I had a conversation with folks at PayPal when I was trying to find my way around the fact that the village board needs to approve of donations, I believe, each month at one of its meetings before they can be accepted.
Yeah.
Make credit card donations difficult. When
Yeah.
I spoke to the folks at PayPal, this may not be helpful at all, but once you accept a credit card donation, it goes through. You can't hold the transaction, but they could hold the funds until whatever monthly meeting that the village had to have. PayPal could hold the funds in the PayPal account, and then the village could approve of the funds at its meeting. And at that point, and only at that point, the funds could then be actually transferred or accessed by the village. And I don't know if that's a way of getting around that prohibition against credit card donations.
Yeah. Okay, let me make a couple notes for myself just so that.
And when PayPal accepted those donations, they would do so while also gathering the name, address, telephone number, et cetera, of the donor. So if in theory the village needs to have the ability to ultimately reject that donation for whatever reason, we would have the information necessary that we would know where to refund those monies to. in practice, I can't imagine that ever happening.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm trying to understand the logic behind the village not being able to accept a credit card donation, being they need to go through a process of formally approving the donation. And this might be a way to kind of hold the donation in escrow until the village could take the necessary steps that it has set. And whether this is something set in the village charter, whether it reflects county or state law, I don't understand any of that. But
now, are you established already as a 501c3?
No.
So we do need to establish you first and foremost as a 501c3.
yes, and that's what I've spoken to Victor about, and
Okay.
to a small extent, Augie. Hello, Augie.
Hello, how is everybody?
Good, good. How are you?
So Augie, we're just having a little bit of an introductory conversation, and there are definitely some questions that you might be helpful with, but what is that background, Augie?
I'm trying to find a pleasant background because my computer room's a mess.
Oh, that's
Not
okay.
as pleasant as I thought it would be.
There, that's a nice one. That's a little better.
Yeah, you look like a busy man.
Yeah. So I just want to get a little bit of background information. There are certainly a lot of questions. So Friends of MEC has not been registered yet.
In the R drive?
Sally, can you mute your
Did you
computer?
read this thing from Cliff?
One moment, let me.
Who are you talking about? No. He cut us all over. The R drive is our department drive. The U drive is our personal drive. Only you will have access to the location. The P drive is the public drive.
Did you get that?
Yeah.
From other locations. The K drive is for KBS, remains the same. Cliff? So guess
I may have to mute my
everything was
Pomeranian
recorded over?
because he's wandering around here looking for attention. So
You're not muted. We can hear you. Do you mind
Oh,
muting
I'm
her?
so sorry. Not at all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
whereas
Okay, so Friends of MEC has not been registered yet. So do you have a board? What is it looking like right now? Do you have members? Is it just an idea that we need to put it all together, starting with finding other members, board of trustees? How is it right now?
besides myself, there are 2 members of the current MEC advisory committee that Kyle Troy had introduced me to, and we had a conversation or two just very casually. Brandon and, forgive me, I can't remember their names, but they're 2, relatively newcomers to the community, fathers with young children. They're very excited about the MEC. We were talking about, how we might be able to put together a group of friends. I've looked a little bit at requirements for minimum number of board members for groups like this. I've seen anywhere from 4 to 6. I don't know what.
I believe in New York it's 3, so you can start with 3.
Okay, so we would have 3 already to begin with. I would also like to offer, and Augie or maybe Victor would have some advice about this. There are some folks that are currently on the advisory committee of the MEC, which I believe is still intact, Augie, or is there still an MEC advisory committee?
Not that I know of.
Okay. There are 1 or 2 people there that have a long history with the Marine Education Center, like Sarah Evans and Jim Desmond. I would like to invite them to join the Friends in an advisory capacity, as long as they were comfortable with what the Friends mission would be, which would definitely be different than the former MEC advisory committee. That was indeed an advisory committee. I was on it when the village formed it, and we made a lot of headway in terms of marrying the private group that had run the MEC previously with the village's takeover, and with all the wonderful things that the village brought in terms of support, in terms of creating a position for a full-time naturalist. And then once the full-time naturalist came on board, once some of the brick and mortar improvements, the capital improvements that our group raised money for, were done, it kind of became like they don't really need an advisory committee anymore because we have a trained naturalist who should be deciding what happens at the center.
Right, right.
But the village could certainly benefit from having a group of private citizens who got together and found ways to raise funds to supplement the village's funds for keeping the MEC going and really furthering its mission, enhancing and improving what the MEC already offers, but doing so under the guidance of the naturalists. So ours is not an advisory, it's a fundraising and
Right.
PR vehicle. And raising fund, I know currently people can make donations to the village by writing a check and by putting in the line item or the memo area of the check that it's for the MEC, and that's where they'd like those funds directed. And again, for a once-a-year annual appeal that we write a letter and send people a self-addressed stamped envelope, it can still continue to be that way. But if the village would want to have ongoing fundraising efforts being done, there really is no way to do that without having a means of accepting credit card donations. And
Right.
I think I perhaps, in my very amateur fashion, I am not a finance person, it's probably very clear by now, but I spoke with the folks at PayPal, and while credit card donations are processed immediately, they don't have to be transferred to the village immediately. If we set up a PayPal account, for instance, those funds could be held in escrow until the monthly meeting where the village trustees vote to approve of any donations. At that point, once the donations were approved, PayPal could then and only then release those funds to the village. And if by some bizarre chance a donation was not approved, PayPal would have gathered, when it accepted the donation, the name, address, phone number, etc. of the donor. So it would be possible to say these funds came from that donor at this location and we can send those back. So that was my extremely amateur strategy that, you know, I kind of hunted around and found. Have no idea whether that is realistic for the village. But I do know that, you know, there's 3 or 4 of us that are ready to be on a friends group. I could definitely gather more board members, could definitely gather more support, but I'm not an attorney and I'm not an expert on, you know, setting up different tax structures or different, you know, organizations like this. So it's really, if there's going to be enthusiasm on the village administration side, this can happen, is the way I see it.
Okay. Yeah, I think the first step, first and foremost, would be to establish the Friends of MEC as a nonprofit. And so I think we're going to have to be mindful of how many board members do you want? What roles do you want those board members to serve? Who's going to be president, vice president, secretary, treasurer? What will be the mission statement? What are going to be the size of donations? I mean, I'm not sure that's necessarily something you can gauge right now, but
we would normally set target goals.
Okay.
And then, you know, I've done a lot of boards, a lot of committees. This is what I've done in the community for almost 30 years. And generally you set realistic targets, say for the first, you know, 1 to 3 years of your organization's existence. And then you set longer term goals, hopefully, you know, God willing, a 5 to 10 year plan, set a minimum and a maximum board member count rather than having one perfect number. And I believe that that is acceptable to do so.
To do a minimum, maximum?
You know, that for the board to be legitimate, it has to have a minimum, say, of 3 or 4 board members. You set that amount, and you may want to set a maximum of, say, no more than 8 board members to keep it from becoming a, you know, a very unwieldy organization. In terms of creating a mission statement, I've done that many times for many groups. You know, most of that stuff I've done.
Okay.
Several times. It's the legal work, and it's establishing a method for proper reportage, because honestly, setting it up is not the part. I'm more concerned about the, you know, proper administration of it, having the right reporting protocols in place, you know, for tax purposes and other purposes. And that my question is the village able to provide that piece?
Well, also keep in mind that once you set up a not-for-profit, you're your own going concern. So in essence, you're going to have your own bank accounts.
Yep.
There are projects that you might want to fund, and there are projects that you might not want to fund. So keep that in
Yes.
mind also. You'll have a little more control over the operation.
Right. Although in terms of the bylaws, and honestly, what I have seen happen with different friends groups is that in reality, they have worked with very varying levels of autonomy. If possible, I would like, or I feel it's important in the bylaws that the mission clearly state what the limited mission of this group is, so that it doesn't kind of drift into, suddenly having very different ideas about what programs should be presented at the MEC. For instance, the naturalist that runs the center, it should be, kind of baked into the DNA of the organization that they take direction from the naturalist rather than vice versa. And I believe there's ways you can put that into the language of the documentation you create when you create the organization, so that it's clear this is not, 8 enthusiastic amateurs with their own ideas about how the center should run. And that's something I think is really important to avoid, because that's what friends groups can tend to do.
I want to revert back to your questions as to what the village's role is. So how are you envisioning the village? I just want to clarify, because I'm a little bit confused on that portion. So what are you looking exactly from the village?
Well, we need the legal expertise to do whatever paperwork is required to set up the 501c3 in the first place. After that, it would take, I would say, the Friends working in cooperation with Augie's office to make sure that, donations are handled correctly, reporting on donations is handled correctly. I'm not an accountant. I don't know how to, work the probably complicated process of making sure an organization obeys all the rules so that they're reporting donations and they're reporting their activities in a legal, acceptable fashion.
Well, at that point, what will
Or
happen?
less complicated than I'm thinking, but I think it's complicated.
But
And
at that point, what we're going to
Sorry, what, Augie?
at that point, what you're going to have to do, once the organization is set up and you start collecting annually, you have to file a tax return.
right.
So
Right,
at that
and-
point, we'll look to see what our auditors could do to assist us in the annual filing.
Right.
I don't necessarily know that you need to have an audit done, but at least a compilation of your books, and so you could present what your activity was by a third.
Right. And ideally, we would have a treasurer on the Friends that would have the necessary skills to keep our books for us. And then those books would be something we would want Augie and Augie, for you and your office to kind of, to look at and review and say, yes, this looks like it's, it's meeting our needs as well as our organization's needs.
Well,
I
we
have
use a firm to do third-party review. So basically, we would get in contact with that CP, because every year you have to file a tax return.
Right.
While they're gathering the information to file the tax return, they could put together a statement and file the tax return off that statement. And we'll see what they charge for that.
Okay.
And that'll
Here's
be the
my-
third-party review.
Here's my concern. The way that I was viewing this is that the 501c3 is essentially separate from the village. Like, I'm counting my work on this right now as actually pro bono.
Right.
I'm not going to be funding it to the village. So what I need to look into is to figure out what the village's involvement can be here, because I was thinking of it as separate, so that I'm like, with Augie's work on it, and Augie, you may know better on this than I do, but
Somebody's ringing my doorbell. I'll be right back.
okay.
Sure.
So that's why I'm not sure what Augie's role or what my role can be as a village attorney. Like I said, I'm viewing it as right now as me doing it sort of as a pro bono matter. So
Right.
I don't know if Augie and the village can even be involved in that sense. So that's something I would have to look into. It's a little bit odd because the donations are ultimately going to MEC, which
Well,
is
yes, exactly.
right, which is a village organization, but you're sort of creating this separate entity to be able to fundraise more easily.
Right.
So it's a little bit convoluted.
Well, and isn't part of it, it to some extent, at least, it's a decision by the Board of Trustees whether they want to take on the expenses that will be involved with, getting the 501c3 set up, offering the legal consult needed to do all the paperwork to set it up, and then would they want to be involved in augmenting expenses or even in any kind of reviewing capacity with the annual filings for the IRS. And that's really up to the village, because I know what I can offer and what the people that have volunteered to help can offer.
Right.
And it's not legal expertise and it's not accounting expertise.
Right.
And the village might decide they don't want to take this on. I get that. And at that point, like I said, I am very happy to run, as I've done in the past with a couple of other volunteers from the community, an annual appeal that is the old-fashioned, you send a self-addressed stamped envelope, write an appeal at Christmas time. We should get a couple of grand out of that, and if paying somebody to run that, it would never be worth it, because you might make $3,000, you might make $8,000 or $9,000. It's not going to make a ton of money. But considering that we do everything for free, that's a nice whatever, anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 check to augment MEC's budget. But I know every time I have spoken to people in the village administration, they have been very enthusiastic about trying to get an ongoing fundraising effort done for the MEC.
Right.
That without credit card donation, and if the village could accept credit card donation, then the need for a separate 501c3 is not as vital, because people could be, it would be an administrative role, but we wouldn't need a separate entity to accept the funds. I mean, I would that.
Sorry. You cut out a little bit. You're still cutting out a little bit. Oh, there we go. You're back. Okay. You cut out a little bit.
Sorry. Realistically speaking, I would prefer that kind of hybrid model where there's not a separate 501c3 organization accepting donations, but where we had figured out a way to manage credit card donations being accepted by the village. Does that make sense to you? And then it wouldn't be a separate entity.
So tell me, my understanding initially was not so much the credit card, but that more the frustration of having to constantly go through the village to accept the donation. So that's not so
no,
much
it's purely because when you get a lot of donations via social reactions to social media, and those are not going to come from checks. People need to look at something you put on social media and they give in the moment, and they're not going to write a check and put it in an envelope and mail it to do that. It's the only reason that I want any kind of official entity, 501c3, is to allow for credit card donations. If a way could be found to do that without setting up a separate 501c3, I'd be very happy. And I just, like I said, I can't make those decisions. But to me, it's about, I want to fundraise throughout the year, and I want people to be able to give $5, $10, $20 donations when they see something on Facebook and they go, oh, isn't that wonderful? They're never going to pull out their checkbook for that.
Yeah.
But they're going to want to go to PayPal or Venmo or whatever they do and give in the money. So,
Helen, I'll tell you too, Helen, a lot of people we've had in the past problems with, people don't want to donate to the Village of Mamaroneck.
True. That is another issue. That is another issue. But I think we could, because the MEC is so clearly an arm of the village, I think we could get past people's hesitation as long as, the social media messaging was on target and simple, and this is going right to the MEC. This is going to this program. This is specifically for the touch tank for toddlers. This is specifically for, the Girl Scout troop that wants to build a floating wetland. I don't know that people will hesitate all that much for the smaller gifts, and for the larger gifts for family foundations that sometimes have written into their bylaws that they can only give to 501c3s. My understanding is that the village as a governmental institution falls, at least, in the strictest legal sense, can fall under that categorization. So the gifts that we get that are larger, they're generally from families here that have family foundations that give out a certain amount every year. and they could be in the thousands. And they're not going to give, if they can't get a letter from the village, you know, that they can use for this in the same way they'd use a letter for tax purposes from a private organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Augie, are we giving those right now? Those we give those, correct?
We do send thank you letters.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Augie, the requirement that it's sent in as a check and not a credit card donation, do you know where that requirement comes from? Are you aware of the history of that?
Well, there's no, it's the lack that we don't have the ability to collect via credit card that you have to send a check.
So it's not a prohibition.
No, it's not a prohibition. We just have no way to collect it via credit card.
Why couldn't the village set up a PayPal account? Because they don't want to administer it, or because there's a rule against it?
All right, so village can't set a PayPal account up to solicit donations. Villages, municipalities are not allowed to solicit donations.
Okay. So that would be the reason why we needed the separate friends group, because
Yes.
we could solicit those donations, then transfer them to the village.
Absolutely.
I'm just trying to think if there's a way, so we can't solicit donations, but the setting up of a PayPal is somehow, I'm sorry, my phone's ringing. I don't know how to silence it.
See, but if my group, say if our friends group, we can set up a friends group. It doesn't have to be a 501c3, because the funds are not coming to us. We would be doing the soliciting, and then we would transfer the money to the village, at which point the village would write the thank you letter, because it's the thank you letter that people need for their tax purposes. Is that correct?
Yes. And also, you need a tax ID number to set up this credit card, to set up this transaction.
Right.
Taxes then have to be paid on the collection. Unless you're a non-for-profit, then you don't pay taxes on it. So even if the group said, somebody in the group said, well, I'll set it up under my name, then guess what? He's going to get hit with a 1099 at the end of the year.
Right, which we cannot have. Right. So it does seem that for credit card donations, if that was possible, it would only be possible with a separate 501c3 set up to accept those.
Correct.
I guess a little bit.
Those are the only issues that come up by not accepting check.
Right.
So by accepting check, it's not considered soliciting?
If somebody sends a check to the village of Mamaroneck,
It's just like, oh, this fell in our laps?
Yeah, good question.
yeah, absolutely, it did fall on our laps.
How come money by credit card is under such a different set of rules than money by check? Because money's money.
It's on a website. You're soliciting. It's completely different. Somebody who comes in and makes hi, I want to make a donation to, the Bud Walker Park for $1,000. We take their information, we take the check, and we submit it to the board for approval. They have to accept the donation.
Right.
The board may not want that donation.
Well, we were
So
saying
even if I accepted, say I'm the MEC friends, even if I accept a credit card donation and then transfer the monies, however, I could write it, put it into it. It can go into a checking account set up for that. And then I write a check to the village because I was the initial recipient of the gift. It's a problem because this, basically the friends would be an escrow account for people to give money to, or a holding account for people to give money to in whatever form works best for them. We'd be doing the soliciting. The village wouldn't be doing it.
All right, so when you say you would be accepting the credit card, would you be accepting the credit card as an individual or as a non-for-profit?
Well, if the village can't accept the credit card, then it has to be as a non-for-profit, because I can't take on, or no one's going to take on that kind of tax liability.
And that's where we get to, once again, it's the tax liability to address.
Right.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just not understanding the difference between, because the village didn't solicit all the funds that we already raised for the MEC, and that wasn't a problem, But
That's what I was going to say, is I think this requires a little.
the Harbor Island Conservancy. They solicit funds, they manage those funds, and
Right.
periodically they'll come to the village with projects that they
Right.
want to do. And the village either has the option to accept that project or not.
Right.
The village is not accepting funds. They have a third-party entity coming to the village offering to do something.
Okay, that makes sense.
Here's my takeaway. I think that I'd like to look into this a little bit more in terms of solicitation, and what that looks like, and see it all if there's any way for us to avoid having to set up the 501c3. Otherwise, it sounds like if there's not, we will have to proceed with the 501c3. And then at that point, we'll want to make sure that we get the board members down, the roles down. We'll have to have a discussion about the mission statement, the bylaws. We would have to proceed with the whole kit and caboodle. That can take a little bit of time. It will be a few
Right.
months at least before we would be able to move
Right.
forward as a functioning nonprofit. But
And Christy, then I guess the other, the other possibility, which I would love, but I have not found those people yet. If there was, an attorney in the village who would take this on as a pro bono project, who is not a member of the village administration,
Right.
that would be fine too. I'm not attorney. I can't create
Right.
the necessary documents and go through the necessary steps.
Yeah.
I have not found any, can't swing a dead cat without hitting an attorney in this town. There's so many of them.
True.
But,
That's true.
the ones that volunteer, they're already so overburdened. They're all doing like 4, 5, 6 different things, as am I. And you're here right now, pro bono. So there's wonderful people doing wonderful things, but I have not found an attorney in the community, and it would have to be a community member, because that's who would have the interest. I can ask the other folks that have been talking to me about the Friends whether they could try also to cast a net and see if there's an attorney in the community that would be interested in doing this paperwork for us. That's just another possibility.
Yeah, let me talk to Bob Spalzina, who's I'm the deputy village attorney. He's the village attorney, and see if because we do have somebody in our firm that has set up nonprofits before, so she might be a good asset, and if she would be willing to take it on. She's not necessarily in the village, but we do have that connection to her.
Right.
And if you want someone specifically from the village, obviously you're free to look
Yeah,
into
I don't think that matters. It matters that the paperwork is done correctly.
Right.
Because from this,
Yeah.
I'd rather not start it than start it and have it become a mess.
Yeah. Okay, so let me look into a couple issues and see if I can't get an answer. And then, like I said, if we do have to proceed with a 501c3, I'll talk to Bob, see if we'd be able to assist with that and start working on the formation. And then at that point, it obviously will be cleaner to go through that route.
Right.
But also, if there's a way to avoid it, we do that. So.
Okay, well, I'm very open to, to whatever possibilities there are. And Augie, I don't know, as I said, I am willing to continue to run the annual appeal with Sonny Goldberg and June Ottinger. We would be very happy to do that and make sure we're doing it, by the books every step of the way with your office, Augie. But that's an annual. And I think there's the potential to get significant community support for the center if we can set up the vehicle.
Once it takes off, I think it's going to be great.
Yeah.
And you don't know how big this Marine Center can grow.
Yeah.
Nobody says it has to stay within the footprint that it is now. It could
Right.
actually become a Norwalk one day, but yeah, we have to start.
I like to build things, Augie.
Yeah.
I would love to be a part of that.
I know.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, Helen, you have my email address if you need anything in the meantime.
Yes.
If you can allow me a little bit of time just to look into this. I know.
Oh,
this was
absolutely.
because of coronavirus, but it's at the forefront of my mind now. I just need a little bit of time to do some research. So.
Terrific. Yeah, there's no emergency here. I would just love to kind of see what we could do to move it forward.
Okay, perfect. All right, Augie, do you have anything else?
I have nothing else.
Okay.
All right. Thank you guys so much for making the time.
Of
Thank you.
course.
Good to see you. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.